To unpack this call to curiosity is to pry open a hidden layer of Star Wars lore. One where the Nightsisters of Dathomir aren't just a footnote in the story of Force-wielders, but silent architects of galactic upheaval. You think you know them? A tribe of dark sorceresses, bound to their jungle home, dabbling in spells that feel outside the Jedi-Sith binary. But what if that's exactly what they wanted you to think? The Nightsisters didn't just exist alongside galactic history, they shaped it, weaving their influence into the Clone Wars, the fall of the Republic, and even the rise of empires, all while staying just out of the light. This isn't just about uncovering their secrets. It's about realizing how much of the galaxy's big moments weren't accidents, and how a group you dismissed as obscure held the strings all along. Let's dig into why their dark influence runs deeper than you ever imagined, and how it redefines everything you thought you knew about Star Wars' most pivotal conflicts. First, we need to unlearn the myth. The Nightsisters weren't just Force-wielders. Their power was a hybrid of raw Force sensitivity and Dathomir's ancient, primal sorcery, a combination that made them uniquely suited to operate in the shadows. Unlike the Jedi, who clung to balance and service, or the Sith, who craved throne rooms and grand declarations of power, the Nightsisters saw influence as a game of subtlety. Their magic didn't rely on lightsabers or Force lightning, though they could wield both. It relied on control of minds, of events, of even the fabric of life itself. Take their ability to bind spirits to physical forms, or to grow Force-sensitive flora that could poison or persuade, or to manipulate the emotions of others without leaving a trace. These weren't party tricks. They were tools of manipulation. A Nightsister didn't need to storm a Senate chamber to change a vote. She could slip a vial of enchanted pollen into a senator's drink, softening their resolve to oppose a war. She didn't need to lead an army to weaken a faction. She could whisper a spell into a general's ear, making him second-guess his strategy mid-battle. This is why their influence stayed hidden for centuries. It wasn't loud. It was intimate, woven into the small, crucial moments that tip the scales of history, moments no one thinks to question until it's too late. The Jedi dismissed them as primitive because their magic didn't fit the Order's rigid rules. The Sith underestimated them because they didn't crave the same throne. But the Nightsisters didn't care about recognition. They cared about outcome. And for centuries, their outcome shaped the galaxy in ways no one saw coming. Now, let's turn to the Clone Wars, the conflict you thought was just a Sith plot to destroy the Jedi, but which the Nightsisters turned into a laboratory for their own power. You remember Count Dooku, the Sith Lord leading the Separatists. His alliance with Mother Talzin, the Nightsisters' leader, wasn't just a convenience, it was a partnership. And Talzin wasn't the one taking orders. Dooku needed the Nightsisters' magic to strengthen his army. They crafted enchanted weapons for his droids, trained his commandos in stealth magic, and even helped him create the Jedi warrior, Grievous, yes, that Grievous, by infusing his cyborg body with Force energy to make him deadlier. But Talzin had her own agenda. She didn't want the Separatists to win the war. She wanted the war to last. A prolonged conflict would bleed the Republic dry, weaken the Jedi, who were already stretched thin across battlefronts, and create a power vacuum that the Nightsisters could step into. Think about it. Every time the Separatists seemed on the brink of defeat, a Nightsister spell would turn the tide. Maybe a fog that blinded Jedi starfighters, or a mind trick that made a Republic general order a disastrous retreat. Every time the Republic gained ground, the Nightsisters would sabotage their supply lines, not with droids, but with cursed cargo that rotted or exploded at the worst possible moment. They weren't picking sides, they were stoking the fire. And the fire worked. The Clone Wars dragged on for years, turning the galaxy against the Jedi, who were seen as warmongers, and making the Republic so desperate for order that it would eventually welcome Palpatine's empire. The Sith got the empire they wanted, but they owed part of that victory to the Nightsisters, who kept the war alive long enough for Palpatine to seize power. You think the Clone Wars were a Sith master plan? It was a collaboration, and the Nightsisters were the silent partners who made sure it didn't fall apart. But their influence didn't stop with the Clone Wars. The Nightsisters laid the groundwork for galactic empires centuries before Palpatine ever put on a crown. How? By weaponizing knowledge and keeping it secret. Dathomir's archives weren't just filled with spells. They were filled with histories of how to manipulate republics into becoming empires, of how to turn fear into loyalty, of how to weaken institutions like the Jedi Order from the inside. For generations, the Nightsisters traded this knowledge to powerful factions, aristocratic families, crime syndicates, even early Sith lords, in exchange for resources, protection, and favors. A noble house, wanting to expand its power, the Nightsisters gave them a spell to make their rivals seem corrupt. A Sith lord, wanting to overthrow his master, the Nightsisters taught him how to hide his ambition using Force illusion. These weren't random acts. They were part of a long game. The Nightsisters knew that empires rise when chaos and fear make people crave control, and they spent centuries sowing that chaos. They helped topple small republics on the galaxy's edge just to study how power shifts. They manipulated trade routes to create scarcity, making populations dependent on strong leaders. They even planted rumors about external threats, fake pirate fleets, imaginary force cults, to make planets surrender their autonomy to larger, more protective powers. By the time the Republic started to crumble, the galaxy was already primed for an empire. It had been primed by the Nightsisters. Palpatine didn't invent the idea of galactic dominance. He stepped into a role the Nightsisters had been preparing for centuries. And while he eventually turned on them, fearful of their power, their work was done. The empire was built on the foundation they'd laid. Here's the kicker. The Nightsisters' influence is still hidden because they wanted it that way. They didn't leave monuments or holocrons bragging about their deeds. They left ripples, a senator's sudden change of heart, a battle that ended too conveniently, an empire that rose just when the galaxy was ready for it. You think you know Dathomir? You think you know the Clone Wars? You've been seeing the surface. The real story is in the gaps, in the moments where things just happened and no one asked why. Why did Grievous become so obsessed with hunting Jedi? Because the Nightsisters' magic amplified his rage. Why did the Clone Wars last as long as they did? Because the Nightsisters kept both sides from winning too soon. Why did the galaxy accept the Empire so quickly? Because the Nightsisters had spent centuries teaching people to fear chaos more than tyranny. This isn't just about uncovering a secret group of sorceresses. It's about rethinking Star Wars itself. The galaxy's biggest conflicts aren't just between light and dark. They're between the forces we see and the forces we don't. The Nightsisters remind us that history is written by the winners, but the winners often don't know who's pulling their strings. You think the Nightsisters are gone? Maybe. But their influence lingers in the way empires rise, in the way conflicts drag on, in the way even the brightest heroes can be manipulated without ever knowing it. So the next time you watch the Clone Wars or see the Empire's flags rise, ask yourself, what if none of this was an accident? What if there was a group of dark sorceresses on a jungle planet, smiling to themselves as the galaxy did exactly what they'd planned? The truth is more shocking than you think, and it's been hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to stop assuming they know the story and start asking why. That's the power of the Nightsisters. They didn't just shape the galaxy, they made you forget they ever did. And now that you're curious, now that you're asking questions, that's when the real story begins.